So first of all, far all the way over is Ron Yerxa. Ron, right here. Ron started as a journalist in the Bay Area. He moved to LA and opened up a free school in South LA. You're all the way down there. And then he made a move into the film business and was an executive for many years at CBS Theatrical, and then he ran production at Sovereign Pictures. Many great films came out of it. And for the last 35 years, if you can believe it, we're producing partners at Bona Fide Productions. Ron co-founded the company. His producing credits include King of the Hill, Little Miss Sunshine, Election, Nebraska, Peanut Butter Falcon, with Lige somewhere over there. There's Lige, who also produced it with us. And Ron is my main man, Ron Yerxa. Next to Ron, we've got the Dean of Exhibition here, Ted Mundorff. Ted was at Pacific Theaters for 20 years and then went on to run Landmark for 16 years. And more recently, he's now back in where he started, but with ArcLight as the head of ArcLight. He's, one of the great independent exhibitors, if not the best. So, and also, as Ted is on the board of Film Independence. So thank you for being here, Ted. And last but not least, we have Keri Putnam. Keri started at HBO and eventually becoming executive VP there, where she oversaw 48 award-winning series and shows. After HBO, she helped form Picture House in collaboration with HBO and New Line, was it? And then after that, was head of production at Miramax in the post-Weinstein era, where Ron and I came across her. And then she went on to become the head of Sundance, the whole institute, for many years. And more recently, she's done some amazing research. She did a great study that I urge everybody to take a look at, U.S. independent film and audience, film audience and landscape, as a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, the Shorenstein Center. So anyway, this is Keri Putnam, and I would also add she's a great leader in this whole kind of think tank of all of these different groups that have come together to try and do something about independent film. So this is our panel. The first question I have is, from all of your different perspectives, what was it like when the independent film scene first exploded in the late 80s, early 90s, and then blossomed afterwards in the 2000s? What was working? What were we doing right? And what was your experience with all that? Let's start with Ron. I think you have to turn it on. Is it on?
I say hello. Hi. I'm just getting over the sinking feeling of these chairs. When we sat down, it was kind of a visual metaphor for declining independent film or something. So I hope you can still see me. Well, I guess, I'm come at this, unlike my two colleagues up here, in a very kind of subjective, non-analytic way as far as exactly the factors that went into the underpinnings of the independent film, heyday, except that when we were making them, whether they were negative pickups or whatever, you had an optimism that there were many ways for the film to succeed, primarily Sundance or another festival, but and that the acquisition market was rich, and even if that didn't happen, there were a variety of safety nets, where that film could be purchased and shown. So there was a naive, I guess, confidence, and then Albert and I had some successes, which were great. and some films that didn't succeed, but there was enough of a sense of it being robust, and every once in a while, you know, when you had a Little Miss Sunshine, you thought, this is just great. And other films that were more demanding, they maybe didn't get purchased out of Sundance, but there would be another distributor down the line that would step in, and it'd be more modest and maybe have a good life on the transactional world. So I guess, you know, you wanted how euphoric and naive we were. Yeah, it was a very good time to feel hopeful and that there was an excitement, and you didn't really, and that's what was great about really Keri's study, is that it, to me, was one of the first things that really looked carefully of what is the actual underpinnings financially and from a sociological point of view in what's possible with independent film. I think we were just operating on the faith that it seemed to work out most of the time, and it did, because it was a whole different context and marketplace.
Ted, how about the exhibition angle on that?
Well, it was definitely, first of all, thank you for coming. It's very nice to see this many people this early in the morning, early for me. It's certainly the word evolution comes to mind. The exhibition community who played independent film, and that was a big there's a big definition there. Independent film was Dances with Wolves. It was Orion, it wasn't a big studio, etc. But I think part of that evolution was the exhibitor, mainstream theaters played a lot of independent product, that kind of independent product at that time. There were also smaller circuits or smaller theaters that played independent film and they were known to be art theaters. And so that's how I see in the theaters I booked personally, is theaters in Marin County, California. I had a theater in Hawaii that I booked specialized only, and one in Seattle, and so it was sporadic in that way. But I'm seeing the evolution growing, talking, is the financial side of it is because we had this thing called VHS, and VHS became the backup in the way I was looking at it. A lot of these little tiny films ended up on VHS only, or straight to VHS. Not that the filmmaker was starting out to make straight to VHS, but that's how the films ended up. And I think what's old is not necessarily, what's new is not necessarily not old, because we have kind of the same situation in the streaming world, except it's a little bit more reversed. So that's how I see the evolution of independent film. Then theaters grew up. Companies like Landmark, who in the 80s was a repertory, only played repertory, 3 changes a week kind of thing. And then in 2003, out of bankruptcy, we developed that company to be a national exhibitor for independent film exclusively. So that's how that at least from my viewpoint, that's what I saw.
Shall I hit it?
Yeah, please
All right.
hit it.
Well, first of all, just echoing, it's great to see everybody here, and thanks for coming out for the conversation. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Ted just said, which is kind of the business side of VHS and how that's evolved. But before I do that, I just want to, for me, my first experience with independent film was as a very young creative executive at HBO. My first ever business trip was to Sundance in 1991, and we met all the filmmakers on the shuttle, and we all became, many of us, lifelong friends out of those years. And it was just after Sex, Lies, and Videotape, just after, but before the sort of commodification of indie film had happened, and that spirit of community was so strong. And what I see and what I feel today is that that spirit of community is still here in this independent space in a way that's completely moving to me, and I think important to all of us in terms of how we thrive. So that hasn't changed. Just wanted to mark that. But for me, the thing that Ted mentioned about VHS is important. And when I was coming into the business, there were two factors, I think, that were happening at the same time. The first is we're pretty close to what was kind of the first blockbuster era with Star Wars and Jaws, and the studios moving away from smaller sorts of stories that characterized the 70s, that period of flowering. And that meant that there were audiences that were interested in other kinds of work that maybe weren't being served. So that was an opportunity. And the second is exactly what Ted just said, which is VHS. And I'll make this a little bit short. But without the ancillaries, without home entertainment, there's no way independent film could have grown as a business. And so VHS companies were financing good chunks of those movies with the guarantee of that distribution, and it made all the difference in the economics so that there wasn't as much pressure on the theatrical, but theatrical could happen, hopefully. Pay cable, where I worked for many, many years, we were a sort of a next step in that, because pay cable started financing a lot of independent movies in return for those pay television rights. It was very important for us to build up our library at that time with independent film and a wide range of film, then CDs, then DVDs, and then Blu-ray. But all the way through, this home entertainment space didn't wipe out the other windows of distribution. You had theatrical, and you had your pay, and then you had your broadcast, and then you had your educational, all sorts of rights where you could make enough money to sustain the space for investors, for distributors, for filmmakers. What's different in the streaming area, which indeed is just another ancillary, right? It could be just another ancillary, is the way the streaming business evolved in the 2010s till now has been, we're going to take all the rights all around the world, and we're not going to promote theatrical, at least at first. Now that's changed a little bit for the good. As a result, the ecosystem that existed was kind of washed away by the business model of streaming. And that's digital transformation. That's happened to a lot of industries. But the issue for all of us to think about is, how do we create a sustainable revenue model? How do we reach the audiences now that those big streamers, for the most part, have given up acquiring risk-taking, smaller independent film in the way they used to about 5-6 years ago? So that's the question to frame. I see that question as an opportunity, but it's certainly right now a huge challenge.
Yes, absolutely, enormous challenge. Ron, why don't you talk a little bit about two things. One is the festivals. I mean, to me, it seems like obviously there are great benefits for the filmmakers, but there are also benefits for the audience as people aspire to, other emerging filmmakers or whatever, and also talk about maybe that first festival at Sundance in '89 that we went to and how we approached that when we first joined forces as partners.
Okay. By the way, I'm also glad to see everyone here. Well, the festivals, as many of you know, generally are a great, exciting place to be. Those of us at a certain age look back on the early years of Sundance, where things were much more accessible and easy to get around, and with a sense of a community that was smaller. Just to see what he had to say about it, I called Peter Biskin on the way here because he kept popping up, including on some of references to Keri's work, and we both said, well, 1985 was our first Sundance. And, you could walk into screenings. And then each year, of course, became bigger and in some ways more festive. But I guess in general, Albert, if you're asking, it was such a great place to not only be with other people, but the kind of frenzy around, is this film going to be purchased in a good way or purchased at all, or are we discovering new talent? And it still, exists that way even this year at Sundance and elsewhere. A lot of, exciting people are discovered. It's just become more corporate and hard to maneuver, and in general, a tougher place to be, but still exciting. Albert was referencing 1989, when we both got sort of burned out or tired of what we were doing in two different ways, kind of being executives, I guess. We went to the 89 Sundance Festival, and even then you could, just as a footnote, it used to be that the first part of the festival at Sundance was the only time to be there, and the second half, everyone, is that the way? No, the first half, no one would be there. The second half, everyone would be there as buyers. It's like, why would you come the first half? Anyhow, we did go the first half because it was the easier way to go. And without going into a 20-minute story, we were fortunately thrown out of a small reception at Prospector Square at Sundance for not having the proper hand stamp. And so we went over across the street to see the first screening of Sex Lies videotape. And, no one had heard of Soderbergh, and the screening wasn't very full, and people felt that's a weird title, that's got to go. And, he was, as he was, a very young, kind of seemingly nervous guy, but easily accessible. And we had a book that we just had a hold on. And so you could just walk up and say, are you willing to have coffee tomorrow morning, which he was. And he was, I think even that year, driving the tram around with people. It was just a very friendly, accessible thing where he told us about a book that he always wanted to do, and we had this book that we didn't really have an option on, but we had a free run with the agent. And so that led to really our first movie together, King of the Hill, which is an interesting study unto its own. It's a Soderbergh film, and it's highly thought of, and Steven still thinks very highly of it. It wasn't successful in a commercial sense, maybe in a critical sense. It went to Cannes, and got noticed, but it was not the kind of independent film that was going to be discovered from an audience point of view. I don't know, is there any other aspect of that you wanted?
I just wanted to add that Slamdance in some ways is everything that Sundance used to be. Nowadays, if you try and approach a director at Sundance, there's probably an army of publicists and handlers and whatever. But here, it's a very open situation where you should interact with the filmmakers, and I'm sure all of you have your own ideas about what you want to do, and this is an open forum. So I'd say there's a lot to explore within the confines of Slamdance. Ted, why don't you talk about the importance of theatrical for an independent film?
Well, we started out the other day talking about history a little bit. So just so you understand, going back to my Orion thought, is that films, again, played normal commercial, independent films played normal commercial theaters. Keri brings up a really good point with things started changing with Jaws, Star Wars. What changed was how film was released. It wasn't released slowly. It started being released all at one time, maybe even the whole country. I mean, prior to that, films would open in Minneapolis and then move to Harold and Maude. I saw in Minneapolis way before it played in California, 6 months. So that is really part of that evolution. And as the theaters grew in size and played more and more film, it gave the opportunity for the specialized specialty films theaters to focus on that product. And that is how that evolved. And in landmark days, in 2000s, you know, you could see at ArcLight, the film would open at ArcLight, would open at Landmark, would open in 2 or 3 theaters in New York City. That's it. And that is how you marketed film. And it's important to realize that. That isn't happening today. And that's really important. Films are going out almost like commercial films now, smaller films. There's sometimes a token that there's only 2 or 3 theaters, so they can get some publicity. Screen averages become talked about. That becomes the marketing tool. But by and large, most independent films that are being released today are going out in multiple hundreds of theaters. It doesn't, in my opinion, that is not sustainable. But we don't have the theaters that we used to have pre-pandemic to launch an independent film nationwide. You can launch it in New York easily. Los Angeles, not so much anymore. If I were to tell you where the biggest grossing theater for independent film is today in Los Angeles, I think you'd be surprised. Anybody take a guess?
AMC.
AMC Century City.
AMC is correct, not
Grove-
Century
Grove-
City.
Grove.
Burbank. Burbank, California. Now, if you told me this 10 years ago, I would have thought you were all crazy. But that is where the exhibition side has ended up. I think it will change back. I think there's a realization, especially this year, there is a plethora of independent films. I mean, lots of them good. Most of them I liked. Not all of them. But very, very good. But we have to have the platforms to release those. And to me, we're not in that position right now.
Well, when is that going to happen? And then I've got a question for you. Like
That's a good question.
When, you know, how do we get, you know, ArcLight or Landmark, our theaters back?
I think someone's got to come along and help that out and put together theaters, hopefully own them. I mean, we've talked about there being some sort of cooperative where, you know, the guy in Nashville, you know, releases the same film as the guy in Chicago, et cetera, and that may end up what we have to do. But I also think there's an opportunity to relaunch a independent national chain of theaters. Alamo got close, but they still play the same films as AMC.
And now they're owned by Sony.
And now they are owned by Sony, which isn't a bad thing.
No. Just
But
not very independent, though.
that is true.
Keri, I'm going to let you piggyback on that, but first, I also want to point out your study made the, you know, the, I think, very accurate claim that the biggest challenge facing independent films is finding them. And what can we do about that? And, you know, what are other ways that we can get the word of? I don't even know when an independent film opens anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's about how atomized, you know, our whole communication systems are right now, with people relying primarily. I mean, we did a national survey in this study, and people really rely on word of mouth from their friends. They rely on social media. They do watch trailers, but mostly through things that are reposted on social media with their friends, not coming to a movie and seeing the trailer or looking at an ad. Sadly, the sort of gatekeepers that helped us kind of navigate, critics are not as important now in terms of what the decisions. They may be important culturally, but not in terms of what the audience decision making is. And honestly, there's so many different places online to find movies that people are confused. People can't find what they want to see. It's not coming to their theater. It's mostly online, and it's really hard to find. I want to just go back, though, to what Ted was saying. I think, you know, the reason why the films are being released all at once on so many screens goes back to that question of home entertainment. the windows have gotten a lot shorter. We all know this, right? You just don't have the time to let a film develop. So I think the way that we could help audiences find this work that's kind of bubbling up outside the mainstream, is by coming together in cooperative ways and marketing and distributing in coordinated ways together. It's a little bit what Ted just said about exhibition. There are amazing nonprofit art house theaters and the art house convergence, all over the country. How can they come together and book movies in a more collaborative way without homogenizing their individual unique voices in their communities? Certainly it can be done. And the data that you'd get out of that, the ability to have economy of scale in your marketing would be extraordinary. So that's one thing. And then I also think on the streaming side, there's so many little platforms, and they're wonderful, and there's so many individual films going out there on their own through tools that are available now and different strategies. And then there's the big platforms like Tubi and going on YouTube or being on transactional. If we could figure out a way to bring together a lot of the smaller places in some sort of cooperative place that would be a more compelling single destination for the audience for independent film, that's something I kind of threw out there as a possibility in the study I did. Really hard to do, but something I think could make a big difference. One last thing, marketing now needs data. And you can't really be a marketer unless you have your data about your audience, and whether you're a distributor or an individual filmmaker. And there is a massive lack of equality and access to data. The big companies have the data and the independents don't. And that makes it really hard. So there's certain areas where maybe there's some policy or regulatory interventions that need to happen for a more fair playing field, I think.
Let me emphasize the word windows. Independent film needs time to grow. There's not a $100 million advertising, marketing campaign to release an independent film. There is for Spider-Man, so you can go out in 3,000 theaters and be fine. A small film needs time to grow. And if you have a 17-day window, it cannot grow. That is a key, and that is the problem with exhibition today.
I guess I want to also just mention there was a very interesting article in the New York Times recently that Ron actually sent me about theaters all over the country in small towns being taken over by their communities and turned into nonprofit ventures. And they know what their community likes to see. And this is happening in small towns all over. And it's really, I think, an interesting sort of grassroots development on all this. Let me just throw out to the group, because we're hoping there's some time for questions. But where is their hope to be found right now? Where do you see any exciting new developments that, like this whole movement to take over their theaters, but collaborations and things that might lead to something?
Well, this is sort of a mixed bag of things, but in some ways, various theaters are very lively archival repertory theaters, where there's a kind of sense of community all through different venues in LA. I live near the Arrow, which isn't exactly independent, but part of American Cinematheque. But it's incredible, the audience that comes out for, Bellatar films or films that are kind of obscure. In addition, it's used as kind of a showcase for, films that are about to come out and Hollywood films. But the reason I cite that, along with what Albert was referencing, of a sense of community in a place where you feel like you belong and is friendly and you're going to meet people, you like to feel that in a coffee shop. And I like to feel it in a venue of where you go for see a film, that you're going to run into somebody or you're going to have a talk afterwards. I mean, it's a little indirect, but there was a screening Wednesday of Honora at the Arrow, and there were lines, going all over the place of people waiting. I mean, that's a current film, so you understand why. But Sean Baker, who gave a great talk when he won the Spirit Award about what needs to be done for producers, it's probably online, and you should watch it. But he was there with his producing team, and they had just won the BAFTA award. I thought, well, that's pretty nice of them to fly in to do the Arrow Theater and have hundreds of people waiting outside. But one person asked how one of his producers got connected, Alex Coco, and they both saw the Gaspar Noé film Love at midnight, and it was out at 3 a.m, and everyone was hanging around the lobby, and that's how they met, and that's how Alex Coco became a producer who's, on his way. I thought, well, that is great, where people, feel like I can go alone, but I'm not alone. It's really a communal, friendly event of a kind of a celebration of we enjoyed a film. So that's hopeful on one side. And I'm not sure, I don't know enough about it, but, in all these other ways, from movie to Criterion to Tubi to other platforms, a lot of films that I want to see, I can find there. And, they might play at the very small theaters in LA for a week, but some of them never. Like, I don't know, Albert and I both like The Girl with the Needle, the film that was nominated, probably has no chance. But where would you ever see that film? But you can on Mubi, I think.
Well, and I think it's out now in theaters.
Oh, is it out in theaters?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. Then that's not a good example.
But no, it is a good example because probably nobody knows it's out,
Yeah,
So-
well, yeah, it's an example of that. But a lot of films, like even, it's great to be a member of Film Independent, to be on their portal, because some of those films, unless you're on their portal, you'll never see, I don't think, or it'd be very limited. So I guess my point, to be the optimistic side, is there are places, even though it's not in a friendly theater with espresso, there are places where you can see films where previously you'd have no access to them.
Keri, why don't you, or Ted, go ahead.
By the way, just to do a plug, for $95, you can join Film Independent, and you should, because you will have access to every film that was nominated this year and next year. So please, filmindependent.org. I'm just
although
that's my plug for the day.
Although you might want to see them the first time in the theater.
Yeah.
But
Pay
to
for
Ron's
them.
point, sometimes those
Yeah,
aren't
they're
available.
not available. Yeah,
Yeah, and I don't want to, I totally endorse what Ted's saying, but I think it went up to $100. Is it 95 still?
Well, they didn't tell me.
Okay.
They didn't tell me.
Keri, you've done a lot of work with younger audiences and about the emergence of and obviously in a lot of these repertory theaters all over town, the Vista, the Los Feliz, yeah. Where is their hope? And
I see a lot of hope right now, and I think the hope. I'll start with the macro. I mentioned that national survey we did. You have to take surveys with a grain of salt, but this was 15,000 people, adults all across America, and we asked them about their movie-going habits, and then specifically drilled into independent film and documentary, and we found that more than 50 million people call themselves definite fans of independent film and documentary around the country, and that is so many more people than are currently watching and paying for it. So that's an opportunity I see, is closing that gap, number one. Number two, I love the fan communities that are coming up kind of organically, Letterboxd being an obvious example. But think about, as a filmmaker, how can you leverage the film talk? How can you leverage the independent film-loving influencer on Instagram or on YouTube? How can you think about working very closely with the biggest influencers on Letterboxd and getting your work out there? And Letterboxd is doing a lot of interesting things now with considering taking films that are less known, less distributed, and promoting them to their community. So that could be the kind of initiative I could see coming forward. And that brings me to the third thing, and then I'll stop talking. But there's a lot that's too optimistic about. I think the third thing is how many kick-ass punk experiments are happening right now in our space because of adversity. We're a scrappy sector, and we're not going to wait anymore for the gatekeepers to give us all of their money and, basically take all of our rights and control what to do. We're going to be the kind of community that recaptures the energy of when we started, which was oppositional to a very corporate mainstream. And I think that is the opportunity I see in incredible, online sites that are offering ways to amplify your audience using data, direct to consumers, video coming onto Substack. You think about what the Fithian folks are doing, allowing independents to book into theaters. There are countless small experiments happening all over the country, and you can access them now and try them and become part of shaping that future. So,
excellent. I'm going to throw it to Ted for where are there pockets of hope, and then we'll have 5 minutes for a couple questions.
Well, Ron hit the secret sauce. The Landmark we knew, ArcLight we knew, and I'll get into who's doing it now, and that's creating community. And that's what we are, that's what this group is, and the independent film secret sauce to success is community. Music Box in Chicago. Community. By the way, more box office, their biggest years are now, prior to pandemic. So that gives you an idea. Toby down in Nashville with Bell Court. Prince Charles in London. These are communities that have been created and are successful. And I'll leave you with my last one, because I was in it 3 weeks ago, is the Violet Crown in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They are at 2019 levels box office-wise. So just those examples tell you there is hope, and if you can find and maintain the secret sauce, you'll be successful as an exhibitor, and an exhibitor that exhibits independent film.
So we have a couple minutes, 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand, and please speak real loud, because there isn't mics out there. Okay, you with the hat back there. So the question is there a way to take behind-the-scenes footage while you're making a film and get it out there so there's an awareness of the film as it comes? Who wants this?
Yeah, I think we see the most successful independent distribution, individual films doing that already, building up, the way you used to have to do when you were funding on Kickstarter. Feed your community background information about the struggle, about the opportunity, let them get to know you, and then footage. And on a bigger scale, that's exactly what made A24 successful, among other things, over the last decade, is a marketing company that helped them drop content early on about the movies that was memeable and engageable and controversial, and getting people talking on social in a very targeted way. Again, some of the best of that work requires a lot of data to make sure you're matching what you're posting with where you're posting it, but I think it's exactly the right idea, and yeah, go do it.
Well, you stole that idea, I'm saying that in a nice way, from A24 back when you sponsored, I'll call it, was a film called The Architect. It's a small film, and you used the marketing that A24 used. And
you're talking about Columbus? No.
Anyway, there was this tiny film, and
we tried. Yeah, we did. We tried because
Yeah.
when someone's doing something at scale that you want to try.
But it was
we had
successful.
a fellowship at Sundance. It was a distribution fellowship, and we were
Yes.
experimenting with different kinds of films. And we got Operum, which was that company, to come and help this little film, which was Kogonada's film. I think you're talking
Yes.
about, called Columbus. Yeah.
And no one would have seen that film. Nobody. It was tiny, but they were able to find the target audience, period.
And those case studies for all the films we did at the Sundance Distribution Fellowship, this was 2014, 15, they're all online. Go find them. They actually tell a pretty good story way before the tools were as accessible and usable as they are today. So go check it out.
Yeah, the only thing I would caution about that is you get the most bang for your buck but right before the film comes out. So you don't want to overexpose it in the early stages, but it's good to start to lay the seeds for your festival play, your release, and all that. So good question.
Wait, hi. I'm just wondering, it's particularly about, I guess, independent theaters and distribution for independent film. I guess I'm wondering, in your experience, what is the biggest pain point for an independent theater, and how can we bridge that gap that isn't being served already? Like, would it make sense for filmmakers to take it into their own powers and approach independent theaters on their own? Or, I mean, as you were saying, Ted, you open up the old way, city by city. Is there merit in going city by city again, but making the deal directly with the cinema and negotiating that? Of course, it's more work, but is there more survivability in that sort of window in like a bespoke kind of deal?
Well, I'm asked this question a lot. And my overall, now individually I could say, yeah, you could do that. But overall, I say to the person asking, how are you going to collect your money? And, there was a film years ago called Passion of the Christ, independent release. Our friend Bob Burney released it. Regal didn't pay. When it came time to collect, Regal did not pay. Fortunately, we had the industry had Mel Gibson at the time, who wasn't persona non grata, and he sued Regal and got the money. But without that kind of power behind you, there are lots of scary moments that you may not get your money out of it. But if we can solve that, then you can do it. But you need a concerted effort on marketing and getting that out. So I don't know that there's enough small theaters nationally to make that happen at this time. But there could be.
I want to just add quickly to that. I think, I'm sure all of you are familiar, if there are service distribution patterns where you can hire companies that will help you with the booking and the collection, help you with the marketing, but you've got to put that money in your budgets. And I know that that's the hardest money to raise. I know that that's the hardest money but actually, if you look at the economics of retaining your rights and going back to some of those old school patterns with a little more space to breathe and thinking about how you're going to play out your home entertainment windows so that there's always building value, your investors should be able to see that money back if it's reasonable and proportional to your budget. So think about who you can hire. There's also initiatives like the Popcorn List or the Fithian Group that are doing some of that kind of booking, because a lot of theaters won't take an individual filmmaker's call. But there are thousands of films in the US only that are going to try to do that. And what that's going to do is crash the system in a certain way, unless everybody's thinking about their own film, and you need to, because no one else is going to. But I urge all of you to start thinking in more collective ways, like I was saying earlier. If we don't find ways to think about the systems and structures into which this is released to make it more sustainable, these individual film-by-film efforts are very inefficient and pretty ineffective.
Yeah.
I thank Keri for that, because it is important to know there are people who will distribute and handle your film like it's their baby. And for you to find those people isn't that hard.
Well, all you got to do is wait for the next panel, because Shane Stanger's movie.
But do a comp to your own movie, and say who distributed that comp.
Yeah.
And look at that, and then approach that person or that company, and that should work for you. Way better than the idea of you calling up phone numbers and way better.
Throughout the whole day, and by the way, we don't have any more time for questions, but throughout the whole day, the next panel, Barbara is going to be talking to Shane about a movie that Shane has worked with Annalisa on that kind of followed that path. And then later in the day, Annalisa is going to be going through a lot of examples of people that are doing direct distribution and experimenting in different ways. We all need to experiment. Big thanks to Slamdance, Peter, Taylor, everybody, for having the opportunity to speak to all of you. And now we will give the floor to Barbara and her group. Thanks a lot.